Hi, my name is Matt Warren. Welcome to Buffalo Rumblings Live. I'm joined tonight by Matthew Fairburn of Syracuse.com and the Syracuse Media Group. But Matt spent a lot of time with us here at SB Nation before he got that cool promotion and got to work full-time with Syracuse.com, covering the NFL draft for SB Nation for 4 years while he was in college, but now he's covering the Bills, and so we're kind of going to tap into both of those things tonight. Hi, Matt.
Hey Matt, how's it going?
It's going pretty well, and you've been out at training camp practices, including tonight's kind of cold and soggy affair. So just kind of give us, before we delve into the other stuff, just kind of your general thoughts. You haven't been around this team as long as most of us who were born into it. So just kind of give us your thoughts on the Bills, maybe in training camp compared to other training camps you've been to and other teams you've looked at.
Yeah, it's my first NFL training camp, which has been a pretty cool experience for me. Initial impressions on the Bills, I mean, I had followed them fairly closely, just like I follow most teams in the NFL. So, a couple weeks of watching some of the All-22 and going back and watching the 2013 season. Plus, like you said, I covered the draft, so I knew a fair amount of the guys. But, it's been interesting to sort of see the ebbs and flows of training camp. A lot of reactions one way or the other, knee-jerk reactions when one side has a bad day and whatnot. But it seemed like tonight, I just filed my observations from tonight. It seemed like to me that the offense, had its best night so far, and things are starting to move along. And just like you see, I mean, last year when I covered Mizzou, the defense was way ahead of the offense for a while. And then you saw the offense catch up a bit, and I think we're seeing a little bit of that happen here. And I think, nobody's going to, make any mistakes about it. I mean, the Bills' defense is definitely the strength to begin with. So to see the offense move the ball tonight was encouraging.
And in a lot of the teamwork, they did it tonight without Sammy Watkins, which is where we really want to start. Watkins wasn't hurt, right? I read that. He wasn't hurt?
No, he was not hurt, according to the team at least. And you saw him on the sidelines. He had his helmet. He was laughing. And actually, after practice, I saw him and Mike Williams doing some work down near the goal line with E.J. Manuel. So I think it was probably just a much-needed rest day for Sammy Watkins after he, been stealing headlines for a week.
Okay, so let's go back to Sammy Watkins because that's where we're probably going to spend a lot of our time here today. Easy question for you to start with. Which Hall of Fame receiver would you compare Sammy Watkins to right now?
It's interesting because I saw Mike Rodak of ESPN compare him to Randy Moss, and to me it was a little bit. I don't see that comparison so much stylistically. To me, I see some elements of Larry Fitzgerald in his game. I watched Watkins closely last year at Clemson, and so. I had an idea of what to expect coming in, whereas, maybe some people that didn't watch him as much have been caught by surprise a little bit. But still, even to me, seeing the way he runs his routes and his attention to detail and, his awareness on the field is incredible. Just his feel for the game. That's what, he reminds me of Larry Fitzgerald some. Even though he's not quite as big, I think he's got a little bit more speed. He might be, have a little bit more explosiveness, but he has that feel for the plays in traffic, the plays along the sidelines. He knows how to high point the football. I mean, he's not as tall as some receivers, but he plays just as big. I think he can really get up there, and he's not afraid to go make plays. He's very confident in himself, and it's been about as impressive as a rookie can look in his first week of training camp.
Well, that's certainly high praise. Now, you had mentioned something about covering him at Clemson. What were the kind of things, we asked Dan Cater this coming in before the draft and after the draft, what are the things that Sammy Watkins kind of lacked at Clemson or lacked in the pre-draft process? I mean, he was drafted in the top 3, so it can't be or top 4. He can't be too many things lacking. But what kind of things was he lacking in his pre-draft process?
To me, the biggest questions I had with Sammy Watkins coming in mostly centered around the fact that he made a lot of plays after the catch, and you see him be, really strong breaking tackles and really physical with the ball in his hands. and you wonder how that's going to translate to the NFL. You know, when he's going up against ACC defensive backs and breaking tackles, that's one thing. You know, NFL defensive backs are going to be a different story. That was really, you know, the biggest question mark I had with him. And then you know, everybody's going to point to his height, and you know that's a fair criticism of him because you know, he isn't that tall, but you know, you don't see that many receivers drafted that high that are that short. But at the same time, you know, like we were just talking about, he plays pretty big, and you know, he's making guys miss out there. I think, you know, he's a physical guy with the ball in his hands, but he's also pretty shifty. So I think he may have to make some adjustments in terms of what he does after the catch in the NFL. But I think he has the skill set to make it happen, and he's making plays down the field anyways, getting open, you know, pretty easily against guys like Leotis McKelvin and Stephon Gilmore. So, you know, I don't have that many concerns with him going into his rookie year.
Now, for the audience that's watching right now, after practice, the Bills don't have media availability for Doug Marrone, so we weren't able to ask those questions after practice. Instead, they do media availability before practice, so we don't really know why Sammy Watkins was on the sideline. Dan Lavoie, who you may know as Dan Rock, has been posting on our blog for a long time, and I know over at Mocking the Draft as well, and he kind of wondered aloud if Marrone was giving EJ some time to build some rapport with his other receivers instead of just relying on Watkins, and that's a valid question. It's just not one we can ask Doug Marrone until tomorrow. Do you have any take on that question from Dan?
Yeah, I would guess that if I asked Doug Marrone that question right now, he would say I'm reading too much into it, and that Sammy Watkins was just getting some rest. Even if he was trying to do that, he probably wouldn't admit it. But I mean, as a byproduct, I mean, it's funny that the offense may have had, you know, I said earlier, maybe the best night they've had so far in training camp, and Watkins wasn't participating in 11-on-11s. I don't think that's you know, I don't think that means they should bench Sammy Watkins. But you know, to your point, you know, Manuel looked comfortable throwing to Mike Williams and Robert Woods and Fred Jackson out of the backfield, and so on a night where Sammy Watkins was not participating and, you know, Craig Urbick was getting tight end reps, you know, Manuel made do with what he had. So I think even if that wasn't Marrone's intent, you know, as a byproduct, Manuel got some extra time with those guys.
Yeah, that's an excellent point about the lack of tight ends. Yeah, they're hurting there, man. It is not pretty seeing Craig Urbick lined up out there. Before we move on to people that are not named Sammy Watkins, I mean, obviously he's a big play machine. He had the vine that Sal Capaccio from WGR shot earlier this week, where he was making the one-handed catch after tripping in the end zone, and then, you know, even where he was faking Corey Graham out and getting past the veteran cornerback. What other things do we need to know about Sammy Watkins other than his highlight reel ability that, I don't know, that we should be looking for maybe in the one series he plays this weekend in the Hall of Fame game?
I think the big thing to me is watching him get separation, because he's doing it consistently here, you know, in practice, and you know, he's going up against good cornerbacks. So even though it's just practice, I think you can draw something from that. I'm looking forward to seeing it happen in a game too. You know, I mean, how's he going to handle when teams are rolling two guys to his side and things like that? I think, you know, he's a player that runs really, really good routes and has great attention to detail on the field, and that's something I've really enjoyed watching. He's a lot of fun to watch, and he's just has this great feel for the game. We'll see how well that translates. Our team's going to try to jam him at the line of scrimmage. You know, how are teams going to cover him? We might not see a lot of that in the preseason because teams don't want to reveal all of that, but you know, teams are going to start to throw some things at him, especially if he makes an impact early, and teams are probably already thinking about it based on all the noise that's coming out of camp.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. Now, we're with Matthew Fairburn from the Syracuse Media Group and Syracuse.com, and we're talking about rookies and their impact in training camp tonight. And we just spent 10 minutes on Sammy Watkins because, well, he's a pretty important dude. Cyrus Kouandjio made, I don't know, his first big splash of camp tonight by getting into a fight. Can you explain what kind of happened there and kind of your overall impressions of Cyrus Kouandjio so far?
Yeah, it was a run play to the right side, Quanjo's side, that went to the sideline, and I don't know if it was a live hitting portion of practice or not, but there was a pretty big hit late on the running back. Quanjo didn't seem happy about it and started throwing punches, and things got pretty heated. That was the first of two fights tonight, and so that sort of got things started off. Overall, it hasn't been a great start to camp for Cyrus Quanjo, which I don't think that's too concerning necessarily. Offensive tackles take some time to get into the swing of things. I mean, we even saw number one overall pick in 2013. Eric Fisher had a pretty bad rookie year for the Chiefs, and so the fact that an offensive tackle is struggling early in his first camp isn't necessarily shocking news. But anybody who's penciling him into the starting right tackle spot, should pump the brakes a little bit because he's been getting nothing but second team reps. I even saw him mix in with the third team tonight at one point. And so, not that Eric Pierce has been great on the right side, but Quanjo hasn't, really done much to push him out of that spot. And I think it's very much still an open competition, but Quanjo hasn't necessarily stepped up to the plate yet.
Well, if you say stepped up to the plate, if there was one thing that he could work on to maybe close the gap there with Pierce, what would it be?
I think the biggest problem with Quanjo, and you can trace this back to Alabama, is when he's protecting the edge in pass rush, he has his outside set. He doesn't get the proper depth, and he ends up lunging and reaching a lot of times when he's doing that. And I saw Marone working with him one-on-one in practice the other day on just that. He was talking to him. He said, when you're going heads up, you're fine, and when you're going to the inside, you're fine. But every time you do the outside set, you're having problems. And anybody who watched the Sugar Bowl against Oklahoma saw that. I mean, he got beat pretty bad to the outside by speed rushers, and maybe that's why they have visions for him on the right side of the line instead of the left. But even on both sides of the line, I mean, Pro Football Focus has done studies on it. I think both sides of the line are pretty much equally important. And if you can't handle speed rushers at right tackle, then it's tough for a team to trust you and put you there. So I think that's still his biggest issue, and we'll see if he gets it worked out.
Okay. Preston Brown, linebacker from Louisville, was a guy that some people had even talked up as someone to come in and replace Kiko Alonso at weak side linebacker. That hasn't really materialized. He's been taking almost all of his reps behind. Why can't I think of his name right now?
Brandon Spikes.
Yeah, there you go. Whatever. Some Bills blogger I am. But anyway, so he's been taking most of his reps behind Brandon Spikes. What have you seen out of Brown when he's been in there?
Yeah, I think it makes sense that he's getting those reps inside. I was among those who thought he had the skill set to, play some weak side linebacker and, fill in for Kiko Alonso. And I think for me that was probably underestimating Nigel Bradham, if anything. A guy I didn't know much about coming into camp, and he's performed really well. And I think, what you're seeing is the Bills don't necessarily want to, take away those reps from Bradham, and at the same time they envision a future for Preston Brown on the inside, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, as a run defender, that's an aggressive player with a lot of energy, but he's not necessarily super athletic in coverage, and so I think they definitely think he's got a future at middle linebacker, and they teach the linebackers to play all positions. There's a chance he'll get in there and play some nickel defense, and maybe he'll get in on the weak side. I think that's far from settled at this point. But his best fit is definitely on the inside, and while Nigel Bradham's playing well, they might as well keep him there, get him those reps.
One of our readers, Kaisertown, asks, has he been a liability in coverage, and does he have 3-down chops? Between your study of him at Louisville and what you've seen in training camp, does he have the chops to play all 3 downs?
I do think he does, and I think you're seeing him get mixed in on nickel. That's a good sign that the Bills think he has that type of potential as well. And I think he's not super quick. He's not Kiko Alonso in coverage, but not many linebackers are. And so it's tough to sort of, when you're comparing him to a guy like that, nobody's going to be able to replace Alonso in that area. But I do think, eventually he can play all three downs, and it's going to take some time of him sort of getting used to the coverage schemes and things like that. But from a skill set wise, I mean, he's a lengthy guy. He can handle himself, and I just think that's one of the toughest aspects for guys to get used to as a linebacker. And unless your name's Kiko Alonso, I guess, because he was really good at it a year ago. But I think he could hold up there long term.
It should show you how far I've come, guys. In the last week, we had Joe Biscaglia from WGR on last week, and we couldn't mention Kiko Alonso's name because that would just break down into a sobbing mess. But have you seen him at all? Is he at St. John Fisher?
He is not. He's rehabbing right now, and he's gonna rejoin the team when they get back to Orchard Park in late August. So I have not seen the great Kiko Alonso yet in my time covering the Bills.
That's sad. I don't know. Legendary. Okay. Back to our topic tonight, which is the 2014 NFL Draft, the Buffalo Bills rookies and how they're doing in training camp. We're joined by Matthew Fairburn from Syracuse.com. A guy whose name I haven't seen a ton of is Ross Cockrell, a cornerback out of Duke. What have your impressions been of Cockrell so far?
Yeah, he's a guy that he's really, really competitive out there. You see it every day. He's got a ton of energy, and he's not afraid to be physical. He's not a big cornerback necessarily. He's tall, but he's not big. He's like 190 pounds, I think, and I think that sort of limits him a bit. But he's really competitive going after the football in the air, and he's not afraid to be physical at the line of scrimmage. And those are two, pretty admirable qualities to have as a young cornerback. He's been John with guys on the field. He's a fun guy to watch. But I noticed one of the questions in the comments was, if he could play outside or if he's best suited for the slot. And I think most likely because of he's not great, turning his hips and running. He's not the most athletic guy. That leads me to believe he should be, in the slot a bit more. I always saw him as more of a zone cornerback coming out of Duke, but at least the competitiveness he's bringing is really encouraging, and I think there's a lot to work with there, and there's not a ton of pressure for him to succeed early. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops.
Yeah, that question you just answered was from BFLO, one of our users, commenting down here at BuffaloRumblings.com. Has he been running ahead of Ron Brooks, have you noticed?
They've sort of been mixing guys in at all different spots, and so Ron Brooks has been getting pretty good reps, and I haven't been totally impressed. Tonight he got an interception, really nice play on his part. He actually had a good night overall. So they've been mixing in a lot of different looks at corner, especially because Leotis McKelvin has pretty much been doing no teamwork as he comes back from off-season hip surgery. And so, yeah, I think, I don't think Cockrell's on the roster bubble at all. He was a fourth-round pick, and he's playing fairly well. Ron Brooks is a guy, a little bit older, I think could be on the bubble. And so I think, Cockrell's part of the reason why he probably could be. And, you're seeing a really competitive camp from Cockrell. And, Brooks had a good night tonight, but, it's one of those things that's sort of going back and forth.
Absolutely. What was I going to add? Oh, Cyril Richardson, guard, didn't make Brian Galliford's final roster projection, 53-man roster projection today at BuffaloRumblings.com. What's the deal with Richardson? I mean, he was a fifth-round pick, but he certainly hasn't been generating any buzz.
No, he's been, I've had a lot of people ask me about him too. Because he was sort of a big name coming out. He was one of those guys that was perceived to have fallen in the draft, even though I'm not sure he was ever going to be drafted that high to begin with. But people have asked me about him, and I try to key on him at camp, and it's really just a whole lot of nothing, just because he's sort of buried on the depth chart, and he's not doing a whole lot. He didn't have a ton of success in the one-on-one pass rush drills they do, and he's just not getting a lot of opportunity to do much, and when he does, he hasn't been all that impressive. The biggest problem with Cyril Richardson, I think, was his conditioning. He showed up to the Senior Bowl pretty overweight. I don't know what he's weighing right now, but he doesn't necessarily look like he's in the greatest shape. And he's a guy that's one of those fringe guys for me as well. Even though he was a fifth round pick, he just hasn't been doing much, and it's tough. You only get so many chances to make an impression, and there's 90 guys out there fighting for spots. If you're not fighting, then it's easy to let go of you. So I don't know. I haven't seen a ton yet, but again, it's early for these offensive line guys. Take some adjustment, but early signs are not encouraging on him.
Now, what position did he play at Baylor, and did he ever cross-train? Does he have any positional versatility at center or tackle?
I think he played a bit of tackle at Baylor, but he was mostly a guard late in his career, from what I watched of him. I don't think he could play tackle in the NFL. He's somewhat athletic for a guard, but I don't think he could handle it in the NFL.
That was the reason that Galliford gave for choosing Doug Legursky of all people over Richardson, was that Richardson couldn't slide over and play center like Legursky would be able to. So that's certainly going to be a battle to monitor. They've been giving Chris Hairston a ton of reps at right guard, and then of course the incumbent Craig Urbick. So Richardson's got an uphill climb to make this roster, I think, at this point. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's part of it is this was sort of Doug Whaley's first draft at in full command here, and I noticed that he took some risks a little bit on guys that had some talent and that hadn't necessarily put it all together. And so Richardson was one of those guys, and if it doesn't work out, that's fine. I mean, he flashed at times. I just think some of these other guys are more experienced, and like you said, the versatility in the NFL, I mean, that's everything. I mean, Chris Hairston can slide all over the line, and some of these other guys can play center. So Richardson just doesn't bring some of those skills to the table, and that's the type of stuff that GMs look at when they're looking at bubble guys.
Absolutely. We won't spend a ton of time on Randall Johnson because he was just activated, what was it, Friday or Thursday? I can't remember which day it was. But have you noticed anything about Randall Johnson in the short time he has been on the practice field?
He's a really big guy. I didn't get a ton of time to look at him in the pre-draft process. He was one of those seventh round guys that had me scratching my head when I was watching the draft. Even Dan and I didn't know everybody that got picked. And so he's a big guy though, and he's got pretty good length. To me, he looks like a guy that would fit as like a 3-4 pass rushing linebacker, and the Bills are working him in at strong side linebacker. Maybe he'll be a situational blitzer and things like that. He looks like he has the physical tools to do some damage, but like you said, we haven't seen a ton of them, so I'm sort of looking forward to see how they work him in.
Yeah, one of the most intriguing prospects that we're looking at in training camp so far is Cyril Henderson, who's been stepping in at left tackle while Chris Hairston's been on the NFI. He's injured, illness. We can't disclose it, any of that stuff. But so he's been manning the left tackle spot with the ones, correct?
Yeah, pretty much exclusively, except for when he first night of practice he had a little bit of a hip issue that made him miss some reps. But other than that, he's pretty much been full go with the ones, which has been kind of mind-blowing to watch.
And he's lining up against the best of the best. We're talking about Mario Williams and a guy who had 10 sacks last year, and Jerry Hughes. How is he performing?
He's getting better, which is pretty encouraging. I had a long talk with Chantrell at some point last week. The days are all blending together. And Chantrell Henderson is a guy, he was the #1 prospect in high school. I think everybody knows at this point. And that was the year I was coming out of high school, and so I was...
Are you trying to put yourself in the same conversation football-wise with Chantrell Henderson?
Not even close, but I was monitoring him pretty closely as a result, and so watching his career sort of implode in college was kind of tragic to watch at times. Some of the stuff, a lot of which he did to himself. He had some tragedy off the field that he dealt with. and injuries and stuff, and you just wondered if it was ever going to click for him. And I was kind of surprised that he got drafted, but you see him out here, you talk to him, and he seems like a guy who's starting to get it. Doug Marrone has spent some time with him, pretty closely, one-on-one. I've seen him 2 of the last 3 practices spend some one-on-one time with Seantrell Henderson, just, getting his positioning right, just the finer points of the game. Obviously, you look at a guy who's 6'8", and, can play at 330, 340 and move like he does. You're looking at a guy who has serious upside long term. And the fact that he's getting left tackle reps with the first team right now is excellent. Like you said, he's going up against Mario Williams and Jerry Hughes. Jerry Hughes has almost been giving him more trouble at times because of how quick he is to the edge. But yeah, both of those guys have been sort of a handful. But he's holding his own, man. He had some good reps against Jerry Hughes when they were doing one-on-one pass rushing stuff, and it's cool to watch Seantrell because he's super strong, and his punch is one of the best I saw last year in college football. And so when he gets his hands on you, it's tough to let go. It's just that technique and drilling it into him and making sure that off the field he stays completely focused.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Bills do with their backup offensive linemen, because we already talked about Cyril Richardson, but especially if Cyrus Kouandjio can't beat out Eric Pierce, you're going to have the second-round pick Kouandjio at reserve right tackle. You're going to have probably Henderson at reserve left tackle, unless Cordy Glenn isn't ready for the start of the season. And I know there was a vague report out today that said he would be, but now you're looking at, well, who's going to play backup center? Well, Craig Urbick has been an emergency center before, but do you really want to go in having nobody else? And so it becomes a roster shell game, really, with how many offensive linemen the Bills are going to keep. And there's a very realistic shot that they might keep 9 offensive linemen, if not trying to stash someone else on their practice squad as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this all shakes out as far as roster spots go eventually. I did want to touch on some of these undrafted free agents before we get out of here as well. Jimmy Gaines has been getting some reps with the ones. The guy's from Buffalo. He's a local favorite up here. What do you got on Jimmy Gaines?
Yeah, he especially flashed once they started doing some live hitting drills, and that's what you hope to see from a linebacker. That's when you want them to be their best. He was fired up, and he's one of those guys that if he sticks on this roster, he's going to be a good depth guy to have because he's a good run defender. And
has he been playing special teams? Because that's really probably going to be what determines whether he makes the roster or not.
Yeah, he's been getting some reps there, and he's just a high energy guy who does a good job. He's smart. He gets to the ball, before a lot of other players, and he really reads plays well. That's what I've liked watching about him and watching him down at Miami a bit. And so he's, again, not a super athletic guy, probably why he went undrafted, but we've seen undrafted linebackers stick on rosters before and make an impact. And like you said, if he can hang on special teams for a couple of years while he develops, you never know what could happen for him down the road.
Are there any other undrafted free agents that you see having a realistic shot of making the roster?
A lot of people bring up Kenny Ladler, and there's a lot of depth in the secondary right now, so it seems like that might be it might be tough for him to make the roster, especially because he's dealing with a hamstring injury right now. I do like Ladler and a lot of what he showed at Vanderbilt, but he's a guy to watch. As the Syracuse.com guy, I've had my eye on Mackie McPherson. And
another fight today.
Yeah, what you were just talking about, though, needing that emergency center. He's a guy I'm sure they could stash on the practice squad if they wanted to. And Doug Marrone really, really likes Mackie McPherson. Really liked him at Syracuse. Mackie knows the system. He knows what to expect from guys. I'm not saying he's going to make the roster. He's a guy to keep in mind because of his familiarity with Marrone and a lot of the positional coaches. Mm-hmm. So those are the undrafted guys I've had my eye on mostly. It'll be interesting to see if some of them can crack this roster.
Okay. Freddie JJ, one of our readers, asked, between Brown, Johnson, and Gaines, which two make the active roster? Now, that might be unfair because Johnson's only played for a few days. But of those three, which two are you picking?
At this point, I would probably go with Preston Brown and Gaines, and like you said, because Johnson has been hurt and we haven't seen much from him, and he was a seventh-round pick, there shouldn't be much separating him and Gaines at this point.
Hardcore Bills fan 37 just had a quick question about the backup quarterbacks, Thad Lewis and Jeff Toole. Which ones looked better to you so far?
Early on, it was Jeff Toole. It sort of goes back and forth. First few practices, Jeff Toole looked a lot better. But Thad Lewis had a couple good practices in a row over the weekend and tonight, and so I think the backup job will end up being Thad Lewis, again, just because he's a little more experienced and he just seems a little bit more comfortable there and has a bigger arm.
Mm-hmm. Who has been standing out on special teams so far?
Special teams has been interesting to watch. I've mostly had my eye on the return game to see who's getting reps there, and it looks like McKelvin's going to be one of their main return guys, and Marquise Goodwin. The guy I've been watching a lot on special teams because I think it could determine whether he makes the roster is T.J. Graham, because he's kind of struggling in his reps at wide receiver, and he's a really fast player, obviously, and so I've been watching him on special teams just to see, how many reps he's getting, returning the ball, because that's going to be his chance to make this team, I think.
That question came from Bill's RI. I forgot to say that when I was asking it. Dan Lavoie with another question. Who is your least favorite prospect that the Bills drafted?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would probably say I would probably go with either Cyrus Kouandjio or Cyril Richardson, and I didn't mind the Kouandjio pick in the second round, I suppose, and same with Richardson in the fifth. I didn't hate the picks. I just really Kouandjio, I went back and forth on him during his college career. I thought he had massive potential going into his senior year, but I'm really worried about that knee, just because I think it affected him a lot in his final season at Alabama in terms of ability to protect the edge. He was favoring it a lot, and I still don't know if he's mentally fully over that injury. And he says he is, but to me, I still wonder about that. And so he was probably my least favorite in terms of value and stuff like that of guys they picked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of guys are asking about the fights tonight because they involve so many rookies. I think they just want to hear about the fights. Anything significant? I mean, I know I saw that Mackie McPherson got a couple took a couple body shots right to the gut from Brian Johnson, I think it was. Yeah. I also want to hear you say Ike Ingusibison.
Yeah, somebody on the sidelines asked me, who was Cyril punching, and I just pointed at the roster and said that guy.
Ike
yeah, Igbonason.
There you go. Boom.
I guess. But yeah, the fights I don't think were that big of a deal. To me, it just felt like practice was supposed to be at 8 a.m. They're itching for that day off. Everybody's sort of been sitting around all day in the rain, and then they get out there to play some football. And these guys really are just overgrown kids a lot of times out there. Eric Wood afterwards said, don't expect anything to come of it. Mike Williams did give a reason for the fights. He said
it was a good quote. It's good.
He said they can't stop us, and they get mad at that. So they talk stuff, and we talk stuff back. He was laughing about it. I mean, everybody was laughing. I don't think it was a big deal. Coach Marone wasn't laughing at first, though. He was a little bit upset.
Yeah, and every time they've been getting chippy, both last year and this year, he's tried to nip it in the bud. And today he got the offensive and defensive lines together to kind of, I wouldn't say rip into them, but have a conversation with them. But they all walked away from that conversation laughing, right?
Yeah, Marone even was laughing in the huddle at times. He got the guys laughing, and so not a whole lot was said. Eric Wood said not much was said in that little scrum. Just he just, like you said, wanted to nip it in the bud and sort of told him to knock it off. It was kind of funny to me that he got really heated right after Mackie McPherson sort of got jumped a little bit, because Mackie didn't start that. And so like Mackey was like kind of trying to be like, oh no, and then Brian Johnson just started wailing on him, and so I don't know, maybe that had Marone a little extra sensitive.
The fact that we have to keep talking about Mackie McPherson because you write for Syracuse.com is going to be the end of that conversation. Anyway, we've been with Matthew Fairburn from Syracuse.com, who used to be one of our colleagues at SB Nation, moving on to bigger and better things. Is there anything else you want to say about Bills training camp in general or the rookies or anything like that before we let you get to your off night and your day off tomorrow?
I think we hit most of the bases here. It's been a fun camp so far, and I'm looking forward to some preseason games to really evaluate it. One thing I would say, anything anybody ever wants to read, don't feel like you can't reach out to me and yell at me and make suggestions and all that. I'm always happy to join you guys on things like this, and you guys got a great community of Bills fans, so I'm here to make people happy and write what people want to read. So any suggestions anybody has for what we're doing, we're sort of trying a lot of different things right now, and I'm getting to know the Bills at the same time, so it's been fun. I'm having fun, and any suggestions anyone has, I'm totally open to it.
You can find Matthew at Matthew Fairburn on Twitter, and you want to throw out your email address at Syracuse.com?
Yeah, it's mfairburn@Syracuse.com.
There you go. And you can also read his stuff over at Syracuse.com. Make sure to go over and comment in their comments section as well. Thanks, Matt, and have a nice day off.
I'll try.
All right.